Hey everybody, welcome back to the Shoe In Show. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Again, every Monday, new episode dropping. The hottest names in footwear, the biggest topics, the best podcast on footwear, Shoe In Show. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. I'm excited about this conversation because we've been having side convos with a lot of our members about what our guest is actually doing in real life. And we're going to unpack it here on Shoe and Show. So if it's cool with you, Andy, I'm just going to go ahead and unveil who our guest is.
Go for it, man.
Well, we got Alan Guyan, who is the founder and CEO of Made Plus, which is a shoe company. Drum roll, spoiler alert, making shoes here in the United States, in the great state of Maryland.
All right.
Annapolis.
Crab cakes, football, and footwear now. We can have
the whole thing. I mean, the whole thing, right? So, Alan, before we kind of go down what you're currently doing, we like to ask our victims, our guests, kind of how'd you get in the shoe industry? What's your shoe story? How did you arrive at Made Plus?
Oh, it's a great story. I spent my early years as a machinist, as a mold maker, and became an engineer. And then I later went into industrial design. But through that vehicle, I spent the first big half of my career in automotive, focusing on automation and process improvement, just-in-time manufacturing, and et cetera, et cetera. But I was never satisfied with those roles for some reason. The product, I had to be really connected to the product. And I started a small consulting group that was doing some ID consulting for some small companies, and Under Armour kind of popped up as a potential client. And they interviewed me and, which I thought was kind of, oh man, applying for a job here. And then before you know it, I was helped build the first innovation lab at Under Armour, along with a tenure there that did multiple labs and future factories at City Garage and 3D printing out the wazoo. Basically, 3D printing was one of my big hero moments there, along with working with some of the top athletes. And I think what I found at Under Armour, which, kudos to that team, and it's a great story and a great, leader, of course, is the product had afterlife. When I spent a lot of time in the automation space and automotive, and even what brought me into Maryland was, a small gap of the DoD side, which was spy gadgets and stuff like that. And I was nicknamed Q because I had a lab, I could build it, I could design it, and engineer it, and then push it out and deploy it. Now what you see, when I joined the company of Under Armour, it was exciting because it was kind of like a lot of firsts, which I was kind of loved doing the firsts, coming from a machine shop background in my early years. But the product had this afterlife. It wasn't just like something on the assembly line. It was like, it's going to be on an athlete. It was going to be on a celebrity or even the story. Who told stories about products? These companies do, and they do it really well. That was one thing that I had a hate-love relationship with my former employer was, do we tell too much story and not enough product stuff? Do we have too much product stuff and not enough story? It was kind of like this push and pull and stuff, but it became most important. But more importantly, it became the foundation of where I'm at now. And that was, I wanted to make product from the age of 18 at the first factory that I worked at. It was a family business at the time. And I didn't know it was shoes. I saw every year, I was like, maybe it's consumer electronics. I went to design school. I came out, I was like, yeah, I'm going to do electronics devices and IoT devices and stuff like this. And by the way, those are boring, FYI. I did it during COVID. I had another small consulting firm between my Under Armour and Made Plus. I had a small little consulting thing, and we did hands-free temperature sensor devices for medical devices for COVID. You would scan your hand and et cetera. It was cool and all, but man, I was just itching to do it back. And a lot of my consulting customers were starting to come back as COVID was starting to come down. So I started consulting again more on footwear, and they all wanted the same playbook, which was 3D printed footwear and how do we, commoditize it, make it here, make it there, and so forth. It became micro manufacturing. And I was looking at some of my team, I was like, let's just go make some shoes. Let's go figure out how to make shoes here. We'll take a micro manufacturing approach. But before I go too far down that, what really excited me about this category I'm in of footwear was satisfaction that I would never be able to satisfy. Because you have these hard bits, you have these rubber goods, you have these textile elements, you have this fit. It's got to look good. It's got to have a color. It's got to be on an athlete. It's got to be on a celebrity. It's got to be on mom. It's got to be on dad, and all these layers of complexity, elements of outside. I mean, heaven forbid you put your shoes in the back seat today, right? I mean, everybody's like probably panicking. But what was unique was the challenge of all the engineering and all that design, along with storytelling, along with the manufacturing. I'll never be able to satisfy it. That's why we did, we're investing in, knitting and so forth and 3D printing. But yeah, so that kind of was my journey into, what got me into business. It was Under Armour. They allowed me to discover, and my role with them was I was the director of innovation. So I got to work on, pie in the sky stuff a lot of times.
Is this the Lighthouse project, Alan, in particular?
Yeah, I did that. Yeah, that was one of my big projects. But even before that, there was innovation lab there, and we did some innovation stuff in Portland, even in Taiwan. So I got to really expose, and they give me great opportunities too. I mean, I did, I serviced them, they serviced me. They let me to grow the 3D printing initiative, which was big at the time. It was super rock hot. I mean, I can claim the fame that, they were one of the first to market on training when it came to 3D printing. And of course, it's evolved quite a bit with other brands. But there was a race at that time. If you really take the snapshot,
arms race. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a really, first to market. In a small snippet side story was, I was ready a year plus in advance prior to that launch. It was a whole different shoe. This is a classic big brand moment where shoes baked. Something's not right here. It would have to be a fit on that case, not the 3D print, which was the biggest worry. But I'm glad we kind of waited because it did make the product better, and the story was more cohesive and allowed for a bigger push. But yeah, so that was my entry to the market was Under Armour. But again, I was on the R&D side, and I did a lot of really some commercialization stuff, some stuff really far out, some stuff, just to get protection of IP rights and stuff. But it was, it definitely triggered the dawn of what I consider to be cool business.
I think that's fascinating. What kind of takeaways did you get from working at Under Armour and thinking about innovation that you now apply at your new company? What does the transition look like? What did you learn that you were like, well, that's a big mistake? And then how do you keep making mistakes, right? We always talk about innovation as failing forward fast, right? It's like you got to constantly be pushing, but also how do you do that strategically where you're not, where your business can remain sustainable and not go, bankrupt by making a wrong decision?
So before I joined UA, I was already really strong in domestic supply chain, like with factories and making stuff, because I was a maker myself. So I had some of these were my friends, some of these were not friends, some of these were just knowing how to connect to the right trade shows, right people. And then I had some experience with Asia, but just a little bit. And then when I joined UA, it expanded big, like really big, because now I had broadened not only Asia, but I also had tracked down UK and Europe. And I spent a lot of time in Germany, which I don't even really talk about too much, but I spent tons of time in Germany developing powder, developing processes, developing product that later got to market. That was a big takeaway. Now I got like another level of education, not only supply chain management, but globalization of supply chain management and how to deal with the different cultures and the different ways of quoting process and what they're going to negotiate on, what they're going to be hung up on. So that always gave me a really good barometer of what things cost. So I can definitely tout that to UA. The other big one I use a lot is tell that story. And that's from Kevin Plank. I give him full credit for that. Tell a great story, make a great product. I think those are just any company could benefit from that. So it'd be stupid for me not to cite that or for his purposes. The other big one too was I have majority been a lone wolf. And I enjoy it being a lone wolf. I still am a lone wolf. I have projects in the evening that nobody's part of that, I got to do it. So I think one thing it also UA was infectious with team, having to collaborate with multiple cells in multiple areas of the globe. Some are right next to you, some you never meet, so that was another nice initiative. And then I think the last one that was probably insightful was how important storytelling was over product. Like actually making the product. I've always thought making the product should be the most desirable, hardest thing ever, because it takes a lot of effort to make a product, but it actually takes a lot more effort to actually tell a story that's convincing enough for people to feel, or experience that process. And I think that's another great analogy. And Under Armour was full of excitement. That's one thing I always will say from my days at Unilever. You had dog years, but not bad dog years. You had just, it's like there are a lot of their sizzle reels, like, there's just a lot of energy. And this is not really citing them, but one thing I did think was kind of unique at UA was everyone was like that. Like everyone had energy to go more.
Yeah.
So when I started this company, as we work through the hiring process, like, do they have energy? Because this is more than just the standard, playbook. You got to put energy into it because we can get a return. And the energy was infectious there. That's actually, and then, that's what kind of, in some ways, on a bad day, kind of give you a little bit of extra boost. Like, we're doing it for this purpose. We're doing it for this. And everybody's all on the same page and we're going forward. And this person, and that was, that was just so infectious, and I try to, and then the last piece is making decisions to kind of follow your piece that I use a lot now is we as a team have to make decisions daily. Depending on where the decision is, it makes sense, but we have to make them daily. we cannot delay. Okay. And I think that's the frustration I had with some of the UA days was decisions were made, but not always on the right time and not always on the right decision. So you had bad timing, bad decision, and then it became a bad outcome. So, which again, understandably, sometimes you need a bad outcome to justify what a good outcome should look like. So from starting this new company, we've had to make a lot of decisions. For the most part, I feel like most of them are educated enough to be good. There's been a few bad decisions, but nothing that's gonna, rock the boat too much that doesn't sway with the bigger piece of moving the ship forward. And that's why I was frustrated sometimes was the ship would stop, and and you just got to wait, and you're like, well, we're waiting on these other guys. It's like, well, we can't do anything around these guys. So it was always like that push and pull. But yeah, great question.
Well, let me ask you this, Alan. Let's unpack Made Plus, right? Let's kind of pivot to Made Plus, because one, you go to the website madeplus.com and you do a great job in storytelling. So that aspect of what you learned at Under Armour has really parlayed itself into your website nicely. But as you and I have talked about frequently over the last few weeks, your phone is ringing off the hook right now, right? And so walk us through what's Made Plus, what are you doing now, and kind of why are so many people reaching out to you?
Yeah, we started Made Plus, after the UA days and the consulting stuff. We wanted to make shoes again. So we, if I wanted to make shoes again, I thought the best purpose was to make them here. Tell that story, which was the easy one, right? Some Americans like American made bought story. That was easy, baked in, already good to go. The second thing was I noticed a lot in the overshoe production, and all brands do it. Some are more guilty than others, but they overproduce footwear. And it's part of the consumer model of consumption. It's part of the discount model of the discount. everybody's involved in it. Everybody's got, dirt on their hands. But what happens is they overproduce. I mean, over a third of these things are wasted, thrown away, and they can't even discount them because they can't even give them away because the brands are naturally don't want to devalue their credibility of being a great product. So they just get scrapped, and plastic takes 400 years to break down. So one of the first initiatives I wanted to take on was, can we make something sustainable with less steps? Just shorter steps. There's a lot of steps in footwear. Second was, can we pull from materials that are a little bit more friendly? I mean, yes, there's limitations to that, right? You don't get every piece of film or every piece of synthetic that you want, but you get a good solid footwear covering. And third was like this made to order side of the business. Like, make these sold already. As we leave the door, they're already sold. Instead of trying to pre-sell them wholesale, we are going to be branching out to wholesale and retail and maybe some other specialty stuff. But in the beginning, I wanted to focus on this made to order model. And then the best part is, which I use a lot of food analogies here, is it's like a pizza shop. Now, if you want to customize your pizza, so if you want to customize it through the process, since we're already making it, this naturally kind of goes hand in hand. Again, when you look at scale in some situations, we do batches, for certain colors that are already dedicated, but they're generally spoken for. So we try to make sure that we do work with a wholesaler, that they're going to move the product, or we're going to have to figure out what the afterlife is of the product. And I'm a firm believer that at some point, even though it's not any kind of legislation, is makers will eventually be responsible for the afterlife of the product, which I think would help curve the amount of consumption, but also the amount of requirements needed. So that was the big thing for us, is how we wanted to build, and then a local production, building a local workforce using a micro manufacturing approach. So the original idea was to kind of have micro cells scattered out through the place. And also the early days, I would say, I'd like to be like Coca-Cola. I like to have a bottling factory in every little small town that covers a population, and it makes a certain type of product that services that community. And again, we look at this as a global piece as well. So if we service the Asian community or European community, that product would not be American design, it'd be European design for the European customer and made with the Europeans. I mean, we may own the company, of course, but the idea is that it all kind of becomes a synergy of community around the design.
I have to say I'm getting a little hungry with all the food references. In particular, I keep thinking about like going to Baltimore and Shirley. There's like an Old Bay pizza where they have crab and like butter on top of it, right? And like Old Bay seasoning.
Yeah.
Like anyway, that just made me more hungry. But I do want to ask about the product itself. Like, is it fully 3D printed shoes, and then the type of materials that you use, right? Because I know like 3D printed shoes traditionally in the past have had like it's mono material. Like, how do you look at the different material aspects that go into 3D printing or beyond on what you guys are making?
We treat 3D printing it in the current state in two buckets, maybe three buckets, excuse me. First bucket is it's an accessory. So if you want to get a custom orthotic or orthotic that's 3D printed, sure. This is the game. Is a shoe 3D printed? No, this is not fully 3D printed shoes.
Yeah.
I've done that. I got samples over here that we've done more of it. We may launch a shoe at some point that's all 3D printed. I don't see that as the biggest solve. Again, we're trying to solve some problems here.
Right.
And I don't know if that actually solves the problem, because it's not really that. It's not particularly that scalable. Second is we use it for some sort of external components. One of the examples is, instead of using tooling, we used 3D printed counters. We got really good at this. So this is future running shoe that we'll talk about another segment. But the fun thing about that is that it no tooling. Again, I try to put manufacturing pillars that can be very configurable for long-term turns.
So you're very strategic about using 3D and whatever.
Yeah. And then the last one is jigs and pictures. Yep. Yeah. So we use it really as a toolbox tool versus a marketing tool. We should market it more, because I think it's still got a good value play there. But yeah.
Why you kind of didn't get to the question I wanted to
Yeah.
ask was like, why are so many people calling you these days? Talk to me about how your phone's ringing off
Oh
the hook.
yeah. Yeah. Well, we're popular for a number of reasons, right? I mean, we are a domestic company, new. We have some. I have a pretty good network from the company that I worked at, but also just being in the business for a long time. So we have some of that. Um, but really, mainly the tariffs. Like people have gotten really, I wouldn't say concerned. They don't know where to go. I mean, they don't know what conversation to have is probably the better concern. So we've gotten a lot of requests for helping people finish off their development, making their development, production of the development to, can you just produce a few thousand pairs for us? I mean, so we can have the story. They want the story too, of course, and also to help mitigate some of the what's going on in the world right now, or this administration. The one that kind of sparked a big interest was I had a major big box retailer reach out, who could command significant volume, just running through the numbers and stuff, and like, well, we got to be this price, and like, I don't know how you're going to get there like overnight, because even in Asia, prices like that is really cheap. And I think that's the biggest misconception is consumers also should be aware of is the amount of cost it takes to make product here.
Yeah.
And this is like publishing business. It needs to be scaled. So making the small runs in the development center, yeah, that's great for a major brand, but being a little company, we would need to, we need to get it a lot bigger to be more profitable, of course, and be more serviceable to these companies who need additional stuff. I mean, we've tailored a line for our product offering. So when we engage with a future customer, depending on what that is, women's stuff or even the military boots we've talked to a few times, they all have pros and cons, but as you know, they have different kits, different requirements of manufacturing equipment.
Yep.
But it is, I think what I took out of the surge of calls, was the American manufacturing footwear community is actually more cohesive than disconnected as competitors. I thought that was probably the best side I see of this business, because when we can get the network of footwear companies and manufacturers to lobby or even to push agenda, grants, labor, training, materials, suppliers, I think this is when we can really start making a real impact on making domestic manufacturing a reality for a lot of companies.
We, we had an executive summit not long ago. We had Okabashi from Georgia, and we had Meridian Footwear out of Mississippi come and talk about their different models of making in the U.S., different product types. One thing that struck me, though, and having conversations with them, and then a range of other domestic manufacturers that we work with through the Footwear Innovation Foundation, trying to figure out how to change what you're looking at too. Like, how do you change the tooling? How do you reduce those costs in those different areas? Right. Was the fact that the domestic manufacturers need real partners. It's not that you're trying to sell 1,000 shoes and tell a story, right? That's great. But a lot of folks were saying, like, I need a real commitment. If you're going to come in and work with us, like, please, like, let's do it for 3 years or 5 years so I can build my business sustainably, and do it in the right way, the way that we want to do it, not just a transactional way, because you're fearful of the tariffs now, but you're hopeful they go away later, right? There's a commitment to it, I think. And I think that's kind of what you're saying too, is like, you can do the small runs, that's no problem, but the shift that needs to happen is the commitment for brands to say, yeah, let's create something new and run it, on our, create a new brand or create a new product type within a brand and keep at it.
There's a lot to unpack there for sure. I mean, I try to like equate it to, like, I know automotive really well, so I try to bring it back to automotive. Well, when Toyota, Honda, these big Japanese, kind of owned firms came to America to open factories, there was no major challenge of getting visas for their Japanese workers to come train American workers, right? Sounds kind of realistic. I mean, actually, it's what we did with Asia when we took stuff over to Asia and also Europe. We trained a lot of people to make our shoes. Now, the generation of making cobbling and whatever you want to call else here has departed, and even some manufacturing sector. Those Asian teams need to come over here and retrain us. But I'll continue to say this: it can't go how we're making it over there because they haven't totally evolved it as much as what automotive has evolved for automation stuff. And there's a lot of challenges with how to automate footwear. Of course, it becomes injection for everything. But technically, there is a lot of opportunity to do so. Like On did some really cool stuff with the spray. That's, again, it's both hype, but also could be reality in a lot of ways, or maybe it is, of course, reality or a small run reality. But the training is
to
key.
me, it's a lot like, for folks know, I'm a big Oasis fan. I'm a big fan of 90s music in general. My wife hates it on a Saturday morning, but when the Counting Crows come on, I'm gonna be singing. I'm sorry, but anyway, footwear's a lot like that. We're using a 1990s model, and we're thinking it's like fresh again, just because the 90s are back trend and style.
And they're really clever.
It's not exactly true. It's an old style that we haven't really evolved that quickly. It seems like that's
really clever. We lead with price with the teams, which is, I always thought that was another thing I always thought weird. It was like, well, how much do you want to pay? Or how much is it going to sell for? And they're like, okay, well, these are what the options we can do. And I'm like, what are we solving first? Like, what are we doing? What are we, and then we kind of work the price backwards. Like, well, if performance rubber, it's going to be this price. With this rubber, well, is it going to help with the performance story? Yes. And we need to have the premium, so it becomes like this, chicken and egg thing a little bit, build the field, kind of Field of Dreams thing.
Well, that's how it works, Alan, on the sourcing side too, right? If you think about Asia sourcing, you have a brand that says, okay, we have these new tariffs, we got to diversify sourcing. They go to the Taiwanese factory group and they say, hey, I'll go into this country and blaze that trail, but you got to go there first and build the whole thing out. And so I think that's where you sit here in the US, right? You have all these companies like, I'm calling up Alan. He's got domestic production in Annapolis. Let's go knock it out. And you're like, hey, I need a commitment, probably a little longer term than one season and a certain quantity in order for me to build this out and to employ the people I need to employ to accomplish, to fill the order. And it's the chicken and the egg. Like, will they create that commitment?
They want to balance too. Like 50 cents. What do you mean 50 cents? Yeah, that's too expensive. 50 cents is going to push us over. Like the multi-million-dollar factory we just built for you, and you're going to walk away. Speaking of that, I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. I literally had 3 conversations in Vietnam recently with 2 different factories that had moved to Indonesia based on big brand telling them to move. Not a ton of money, not like here, but still a few $1 million to set up and get team and get dorms and stuff like that. To not even have an order that was significant, and it's guaranteed now. And again, they moved his stuff back to Vietnam. They did get some of the orders in Vietnam, but I mean, now the guy's sitting on an Indonesian factory that, him being Taiwanese, there's a different culture there too. I mean, they have a service 4 or 5 times a day. There's a certain culture there in general.
Well,
yeah.
Alan, so I will say one last thing, Andy, before we close out. Alan and I were talking about our merch shop, which you can get shoe and show stuff at the merch shop, hoodies and etc. We don't have footwear, and so this was earlier today. Alan and his team, we're going to talk about what we can do to actually create some cool F2A footwear to be in the merch shop. So I'm teasing it out. We haven't even had a conversation about it, but why don't we hype it up a little bit and see where it takes it? Because I think this is a really cool opportunity.
Sounds like we're really squeezing Alan, right? Unless he wants this podcast out, he's got to make the shoes. So
yeah. I mean, the way I look at it is, all press is good press, right? So if we can get the needle moving a little bit, that's great. But I really do appreciate the platform you guys are building here and the continued growth that you guys have had over the last few years for sure. And again, I watched you on TV a few times when the tariff, I was like, man, this guy's getting really drilled a couple times. He's going to have a couple long days. And you're not out of the woods in a lot of ways too, because, I don't know what exactly evolves over the next 6 months with this language, but, I wish you guys the best on helping our community thrive, because as you know, the margins are slim and you have the data to prove that. Yeah. And I think that's the education piece that at this particular time for a group like this could be so impactful for so many people who are just writing things down to get a headline, to move things forward in the best way that they think is possible, and really doing a lot of damage to the economics of it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we appreciate your support and your membership. We're super excited to have you guys on board, Alan. So we really are grateful.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. That was fascinating. And you can learn more. What was the website, Matt?
MadePlus.com. MadePlus.com.
MadePlus.com.
Or you can also follow us on Instagram as well. That's a Made Plus
on Insta. Sweet.
Yeah.
All right. Folks, you can go to shoeandshow.com to download our full catalog. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you leave 5 stars. We only take 5 stars. If you leave 4 stars, we'll delete it. So only 5. That's why there's only 5 stars up there. That's how it works, as you well know. So we appreciate you listening. Next Monday, new episode drops. Can't wait to hear who's next on this series. This year's been the best series we've had so far in our 9 or 10 years running the podcast.
Yeah. We just passed our 9-year anniversary like last week.
All right. Well, happy birthday, Shoe and Show. So until next time, Shoe In is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.